Good morning. So today's topic is fur babies, and I have attempted semi-successfully to bring one. So this is Blue. Can you say hi, Blue? She's not very social. And we have Marble, and she's napping on the bed right now, and I'll probably bring her over in a minute. So one of the reasons I picked today's topic is because a lot of people in the media have been talking about them lately, about how a lot of people in my generation, specifically millennials, have been opting to have fur babies, also known as pets, cats, dogs, really anything with fur, but I've known people who have reptiles as well, choose to opt to have animals or pets as their first children instead of actually starting a family. And so I decided to kind of talk a little bit about it because it's one of those things that confuses me a little bit as to why it's such a big deal. And I feel like there's a little bit of misconception around it, and I'm sure the reasoning is different for everyone, but I kind of wanted to talk about my experience a little bit. And the makeup today is partly because I'm wearing this Pink Floyd shirt and it has a rainbow on it, and I thought it'd be cool. So we got our first cat back in, I want to say March, the 1st of March last year. And the reason we got her was because while I was working at one of my jobs as a receptionist, one of my coworkers found out there was a small litter of kittens in the ceiling above her office. So we got one of the maintenance guys who works there, really sweet guy, went up there and pulled them out of the ceiling. There was 3 cats. So it was 2 gray cats, and there was the Tuxedo, which is Blue. And at the time, me and my husband had only been dating a few months, and so I wanted this cat. But the apartment that I was living in, I think it was $300 deposit for pets, and it was $50 extra a month, and that I just could not afford. But he had his own house, and so that wasn't really a problem for him. So I knew that if I really wanted to keep this cat, I would need to convince him to love her. So I sent him a picture of all of them, and I was like, look, these are, aren't they the cutest little kitties? And they were up in the ceiling, and nobody knows what to do with them, and they couldn't pull the mama out, so somebody has to take care of them while they're, kind of still growing, because it didn't look like they had their eyes open for very long. They were the tiny, I fit Blue into the palm of my hand. She was so tiny. And he was like, no, I'm not really a big fan of indoor animals. Like, if we got something, it would probably be like a dog because it could be outside. I was like, well, that's your opinion. I'd probably still let the dog inside. So I'm kind of trying to talk him into it and how much this really means to him. Granted, this was the middle of the day for me. It was the beginning of his day. So he was still trying to get ready for work and trying to get together and drive to work, and I'm over here bugging him about, I really want this cat. So finally he says, look, we'll try to make her an outdoor cat. And I was like, cool, but she's going to have to be inside for a little bit because she's a little too small to be outside. And so he's like, fine, it's fine. And so convinced him to get the cat. Told him, pick her out. If you pick her, you'll love her more, kind of thing. So we picked her. She's the different one out of all of them. And then I was like, okay, what should we name her? Well, when we got her, her eyes were blue. So he named her Blue. As you saw earlier, her eyes are no longer blue, and so he's really peeved about that all the time. So, got Blue. A couple weeks go by, I'm getting selfies when I'm at work in the morning of him and the cat kind of chilling and watching TV. So I knew that I'd got him. So we loved Blue. We'd been taking care of her. In the first month, I had to make sure she was pooping right, she was drinking water, because she was still not completely formed with her muscles, so her head was always dropping down into the water. She wasn't really pooping regularly on her own, so I'd always have to take her to the litter box, wipe her butt, and the whole process. So she's a few months old now. She's kind of coming up around 6 months. We had her spayed because I'm not about that life. When they go into heat, they're really loud, and done it before when I was younger. We used to have a cat when I was little. It was annoying. Wasn't going to do that. Also, we had no intention of breeding her because there are just so many cats in shelters right now that if we wanted another one, we'd go get another one. leading up to, after all of that, Blue loves to play with these little blue puff balls. Specifically blue. We can't tell if it's because it's a color she can see, or she knows it's her name, or it's just her favorite color, but it ironically worked out really well. So she always used to play with them, and she'd chase them around the house, and she'd have a ball with them. And then one day she started carrying it around everywhere. I'm talking, she would take it with her when she was going to the litter box. Fortunately, she never actually put it in there. She would take it with her when she was eating. She even left a little bit of food in her bowl and left a puff in there. She dropped it in her water bowl at some point, and I just said, "Hun, do you think she's lonely? Because she's dragging around this puff like it's a baby. And this is a little weird." So we kind of kept an eye on her. It didn't stop. She kept doing that. And I was finally like, "Hun, she might be a little lonely," because we had recently switched schedules. So it used to be that she was really only alone for about 3 hours of the day, not including when we're sleeping. And she was usually running around or sleeping around that time, and she was pretty okay with it. But I'd wake up and go to work, and he'd wake up and play with her, and then he'd go to work, and then 3 hours later I'd come home from work and I'd play with her all night, and then he'd come home and we'd go to sleep, and then do it all over again. So she had a lot of play, a lot of people interaction. But around this time, Miles had switched to a first shift position, which means that we were both at work at the same time, which is great for us, but that meant we were out of the house about 8 hours a day, and then we were asleep 8 hours a day. And so she really only had us for a few hours between getting home from work and going to sleep. And then she didn't really get us in the morning when we got up, so it was not a great schedule for her. So we were pretty sure she was just a little lonely. And so as soon as we kind of figured out, we're like, well, we can go look at the pets. I know that there's a great organization here, which I went with, San Antonio Pets Alive. They're trying to make San Antonio a no-kill city. And so I was like, they have a really great shelter program. You can submit the application. If you get approved, you can go in and adopt them. There's different fees for, like, if you want to adopt a kitten, if you want to adopt a full-grown cat. And, I mean, we can get approved and never adopt if we want to. We can also foster if you just kind of want to see if that's the issue. We can also get her an older cat. Maybe she wants to be taken care of. We can get her younger cats so she can take care of them. And we can also take her, because there's a PetSmart right down the road, which is where we were taking her to the vet, that you can go and, you know, let her interact with them a little bit, see if she likes any of them, to kind of see if there's any issues. He's like, you know what? We'll go look. I think the first time we took her out, all of us, we'd already kind of gone by and looked at them a little bit, and I thought some of the older cats were really cute. They didn't have very many. They had mostly kittens at this one, and they're a little bit more expensive. So I was like, we'll get her an older cat. It'll be fine. So after talking to the lady, kind of trying to introduce her to a few cats, we introduced her a smaller cat because she was having a really negative reaction to everybody. She'd like curl up, hide in us, and hiss. She was hissing at everybody, and she wasn't stopping. And I was like, you're the one who was lonely, carrying around your pup around. What are you hissing at everyone who's trying to get you a companion for? And so we finally pull out this one little kitten. She's maybe a few months old. I want to say like 4 or 5 months old. Pull her out. She's still younger than Blue, smaller than Blue. And they kind of come up to each other. She's sniffing at her. Blue curls up and hisses. And the cat doesn't hiss back. It doesn't get scared. Just kind of goes, all right, and then goes and plays with the toys. And the lady said that's probably the best reaction you can hope for right now based on how she's reacting to everything in this room. So I was like, okay, all right. Well, we kind of looked at the prices, and I was like, well, we can think about it. And our husband just goes, nope, we're taking her. And I was like, oh. Was not planning that, but okay. So, and we got Marble. So let me go grab her real quick. Oh, come here, Bubba's. So this is Marble. She's our second little cutie. And one of the great things about Marble is you can usually keep her around if you give her treats. Because she's a little fatty. But that's okay, because I am too. So we brought Marble home, and it was a rough first week. So what I really should have done when we started was research how to introduce a new cat into the area. I just had never had that problem with dogs before. And we had a few stray cats when I was growing up, and we had that one that we brought in. And so I didn't really think it was going to be a problem until we brought her home. Blue was hissing up a storm. She was pissed as all get out. And Marble was just enjoying herself, walking around the house, trying to see what was what. And I absolutely did not know what to do. So we finally researched some things. We looked up some tips and tricks, and we ended up keeping Blue in our room during the night because they wouldn't force them to be together. They wouldn't accidentally attack each other or lose it. And so it would keep them separated, but they could sniff each other through the door if that was something they wanted to do. It was rough because Marble likes to cry a lot, and so she was crying all night, and every time she cried near the door, Blue hissed and she'd stop. So it became the running joke that Blue was just telling her to shut up because it was nighttime. Granted, Blue did want pets at 4 a.m, which is one of the reasons why she doesn't stay in our bedroom at night. So finally, they stop hissing at each other. They start playing. I was already kind of panicked by this point, saying, I ruined everything. We can't take her back. Blue doesn't like her. She's my baby. I don't even know this other cat right now. And I was losing it. Finally, they start getting along. I ended up getting another job, so I was kind of home at this time trying to introduce them to each other. And so ended up leaving them alone. It's fine. Almost a year later, they're grooming each other on occasion now. Granted, Blue still swipes her in the face every now and then because she wants to play, but she's also a little rough. But they get along really well, and they're doing great. So, fur babies. This title kind of comes as these are your first children, but they have fur on them, so as to not confuse anybody. So, a lot of people like to give millennials a lot of problems about it because a lot of our parents had kids around our age. So if I'm talking about my parents had me when they were 22. Pregnant at 21, had me at 22. I'm 25 and I don't have kids. And we don't plan to have kids within this year. Maybe next year, we'll see. It's kind of a we'll see every year kind of thing, and eventually we'll have some kids, I'm sure, because I would love to have some kids, but it's not super pressing. Part of that reason is because they're expensive. Childcare is expensive, insurance is expensive, diapers are expensive, food is expensive. It adds up to pay for another person, and it's not like getting a roommate where if you get a roommate, they work on their own, they produce their own income, they buy their own food. This is another person who is entirely dependent on you and isn't expected to contribute. So this is just another person that you're taking in that costs a lot of money. So the difference between kids and cats is that the expenses for our cats is we have to buy their litter, we have to buy their food, and we buy them toys, and we take them to the vet. Those are all very cheap expenses in comparison. So their vet, we pay about, I want to say like $60 a month. It might be more, it might be less. I'm pretty sure it's less though. It's $60 a month for both of them to the veterinary clinic for a medical plan that if something comes up, we just take them in and it's free. The visits are free. They have certain treatments that they require, like their dewormer, their vaccines, everything like that is covered. The only thing that's not covered is any sort of antibiotics that they might need if they get sick or they get hurt, and that comes at a discount. So if we take them in and there's something wrong with them, it doesn't charge us anything. We take them and there's something wrong with them and they need to prescribe a medication, it's at a discount, but we have to pay for the medication. So it's a fairly good deal. It's something that's worked out for us. Neither of our cats have any medical issues, so it doesn't really kind of come up very frequently that we have to pay for something, except for Marble's farting problem, which if you know me, you've probably heard about it already. So that's one predictable expense. We buy them the huge bag of food because it lasts a little bit longer and it's a little bit cheaper to buy in bulk. So we get them a really big bag of food. It's probably about, I really don't think it's more than 20. and we get it maybe once a month, if not every other month. It lasts us a good long time for 2 cats. They don't eat very much. We give them 3/4 cups between the 2 of them in the morning and 3/4 cup in the evening. Kind of works out for them. We try to do it every 12 hours so they're not constantly bugging us for food. And then the other expense is their litter, which for the most part we don't have to buy very frequently. We try to keep a box on hand, and it's usually about $15 for the litter that we like to get. There are cheaper boxes, but that's just the one that it works for us, especially having 2 cats. And then we bought them a litter box. We have 2 of them, and then we bought them a Tupperware thing, and we made this really cool little litter box where it was all contained, so it didn't stink up the house. And that still wasn't very expensive. All in all, I think it's the not repeating. We maybe have spent $100 on like not repeating expenses, and I don't know, I'd say maybe another $100 a year, a little bit more for their medical, but it really isn't that much. All in all, it's pretty cheap to have some cats compared to having some kids. And especially with one of the big problems that millennials face is getting a job. So it's not just us, it's kind of everybody, but when we were growing up, everybody told us you have to go to college, you have to get a degree, you have to do all of these things and you'll be successful. But that's just not proving true. So some people, like my husband, he has a chemistry degree and he works at a pharmaceutical company. It took him 6 months from getting out of college to find this job. And it wasn't starting off where he is now. He's worked his way up. That doesn't always happen. So that's 6 months of sitting on his parents' couch, applying to jobs like crazy. And he did get other offers, but they weren't making anywhere near enough money to pay for living expenses and to pay for all of the student loans that he'd incurred to get this degree. So he had to turn down all of these jobs, and that's because he had the ability to. He was able to live with his parents just fine, and they didn't, bother him, because he really is trying. He was a really, great job applier, whatever you want to call him, job finder. And it took him 6 months, found this job, worked his way up. He makes good money now, and he can cover housing. He bought himself a house, he has a car, he's paying off his student loans, granted very slowly, but he is paying them. And he has a pretty good life, good living, like extra money to be able to go out, to enjoy movies and things like that. We managed to pay for our wedding, granted not all of it, our parents helped out a lot, but that is an industry that there are still a lot of jobs needed. Now, comparatively speaking, I have a communications degree. Now, communications are really important because they're essentially how you talk to people. Communications can do marketing, they can do helping targeted ads, so like who are you trying to talk to, what are you trying to do. It helps a lot with intercultural communications. So one of the big example is when we started to do business with Japan, their business model is really different from ours. So in America, the CEO makes all the decisions. In Japan at the time, there was a CEO who kind of had the meeting, and then he'd go back and he'd kind of get a vote from all of the heads and be like, okay, are we feeling this? Are we not feeling this? They'd all kind of decide together what the ultimate decision was going to be, and then they'd come back and make a decision. So that was really frustrating and unusual for Americans because this isn't the way we do business. So what ultimately happened is somebody with a communications degree and background kind of came in and said, okay, well, how can we fix this? And so they started to set up a program where if you went over to this country, you'd essentially get a buddy who would kind of show you the culture, who would tell you what to expect and coach you what to expect. In the meetings, they'd kind of help you out with anything you needed to do, the traditions, the culture, and so that way you weren't being disrespectful and you weren't taken by surprise whenever something happened that you weren't anticipating, like not getting an answer right on the spot. So this helped a lot with all of that tension and helped us to understand how to do business with other cultures. Now, we still do that today because we are still doing business globally. There are still a lot of different industries that require this because they're trying to do business with different areas, whether that's internationally or within the United States. There are so many different cultural groups between African American, Hispanics, Puerto Rico, all of these different groups. And so for me, I've had a lot harder time finding a job, even though it's proven necessary. And part of this reason is because I need experience to do this job. Whereas my husband just needed the degree that says, hey, you know how to do chemistry? Cool. Start here, work your way up. A lot of people who are looking for people with communications backgrounds want experience to prove that you know your stuff. And even then, it's really hard to quantify a lot of the results unless you know what you're doing or you know what to expect or you've done this before. So it's a lot harder for me to find a job. So I haven't found that ultimate career path that he has, because he's been with his company for about 5 years now, because of that. And so it's kind of created this really frustrating thing for me. And so if I was on my own, I absolutely could not afford a child. Could afford a cat though. And so that was one of the reasons we got cats. It fills that need of wanting to take care of somebody and having other little creatures who love you, even if it's just for food. And the reasons that they came so easily is because I have their box of food right here. And it kind of helps sate that a little bit. And we're going to go through a whole bunch of new issues once we decide to start having kids, because that's a whole other mess of stuff that is involved when you have pets and children. And there's a whole spectrum of it. And part of being married to a chemist, I have to listen to all of these rants about all of the maybes. And so this is just kind of a really brief introduction as to why some people prefer to have pets over children. And a lot of the times, it's not because they don't want kids, it's because they can't afford kids. And I've seen so many people have kids that they weren't ready for. Not to say that they're bad parents, not to say anything poor about them. It's just, after talking to them, a lot of them say, I kind of wish I'd waited. I wish I'd had that job that will pay for them, or had that support system that I could do a job and take care of them. And a lot of parents struggle because they weren't financially ready for that. And so instead of risking that, a lot of the time millennials just say, I'm just going to get a pet. I'm going to get a dog, I'm going to get a cat, I'm going to get a parrot or a lizard or a snake or whatever pet suits your fancy. Because at the end of the day, it is a more responsible decision on our part, because we want to be able to provide the same benefits that we had when we were growing up. My parents didn't struggle as much. Everybody has their struggles, but we were still able to have toys and always knew that we had food on the table, and we got to go and visit museums. That wouldn't have been able to happen if my dad hadn't found his amazing job and then they decided to have kids. So bottom line, a lot of the times it's not because we're saying that pets are better or that we never want to have kids. It's just we're trying to be a little bit more responsible financially, so that we don't get the other end of that, being we're impulsive or irresponsible because we're having kids that we can't afford, and now we're mooching off of the system, which is a whole nother issue altogether. Hopefully you guys got something beneficial out of this or learned a thing. I hope to talk a little bit more about this later, but I'm trying to keep all of these videos roughly in the same time frame, so I'm going to cut this one short here. If you have any more questions or you want to know a little bit more about this issue or have any questions for me as a cat mom, please let me know in the comments and I'd love to answer them next time. So thanks for listening, and I will see you Monday.